were very few people outside. It was also, school was out of session. So taking, I don't know if that was on purpose or not, but if it was supposed to be done, I mean, it would be beneficial, I think, to also do it when school is in session in a non-pandemic setting. So why don't you get that taken care of real quick? But it's just because you can't hear I'm sure that it is louder when school is in session than when it is not. So I was wondering if that was going to be addressed, or if we should make a comment on it in the general plan, just so that future readers are aware that it's a little skewed. And then if you could comment on that, and then I had another question for Luke. I was wondering if you had read through the draft noise, what's being proposed, just the very first section on just describing what decibels are and the noise and everything. There was a lot of scientific jargon that was inaccurate, and I was just wondering if Luke had a chance to look through that. That's it. Thanks.
Should I go ahead and answer the questions now then? So regarding the pandemic, it's a good point. It's something that the timing was such that we got notice to proceed, and we had a schedule, and we needed to get going. We've seen definitely this on just about, I don't know, it comes up a lot, right? We've dealt with this on a lot of projects, and in general, with traffic being a little bit lower because of the pandemic, the thing with noise is even if the traffic's half, the difference is about 3 dB. I don't believe, I've seen different numbers of traffic being reduced, especially back in July. Things were not shut down as much. If we had done measurements in March, I might say we should think about updating. But even so, I think that the difference with reduced traffic might be in the order of a dB, and probably not that substantial in the big picture. As far as school, again, unless we're talking the immediate vicinity of a school, or we're talking something like Del Oro high school football stadium noise or something, usually those kinds of seasonal things, again, unless we're in the immediate vicinity of a school, I don't know that there would be specific concern. I'm definitely open to it if there's a specific thing. The thing with the general plan, it is pretty broad, right? We're looking at, the whole town. We're not necessarily focusing on micro areas. It's big picture noise type stuff, right? So, traffic patterns in the immediate vicinity of an elementary school, or, again, maybe if it's the high school, it might affect traffic a little more on like Horseshoe Bar, but, generally we don't really aren't too worried about that unless it's, like I said, a specific maybe development project that might be affected directly by, that school facility. So I'm definitely open to hear what the committee's thoughts are in these issues, and see if there's anything else we need to take a look at. Some data, in answer to your question, we are reusing a lot of what was in the previous general plan. And so we've tried not to cut too much of what's already in there. And so some of that boilerplate kind of stuff, I did not go through with a fine-tooth comb. And so if there's specific things that, that caught your attention, I'd be happy to look at it. I certainly can give it a review. Some of that boilerplate stuff, we just kind of kept in there. So we didn't give the appearance that we're just trying to start over on everything. But again, I'm definitely willing to go back and look at the front end of that and see if there are things that jump out at me on a second review. Sure.
So just another follow-up is there were a couple of places where you're measuring the sound levels at schools, like you were measuring them at the school. But from what I'm gathering, you weren't trying to measure the screaming kids noises. You were trying to measure the traffic patterns around the schools, the noise
Yeah,
from the traffic.
if one of our sites happened to be by a school, that was more coincidental or maybe a matter of convenience or something.
Okay.
Yeah, but not necessarily that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
David, you had a second question that had to deal with an article and you thought there might be some inaccurate language in there.
Yeah, I think he addressed that. He was talking about when he was talking about the boilerplate stuff. I think that's what he meant.
Okay, great. Yeah, I had an internet connection problem. So, okay, thank you.
Yep.
I would have a question, please.
Carolyn, go ahead.
What is the standard that you use? I noticed your short-term exposure limits were only 10 minutes at the schools. And what standard? OSHA uses 15 minutes for STEL. So I couldn't see from the document what was the standard that you used to determine.
It's really just general practice. We're taking a general ambient measurement. It's not governed by OSHA. It's really more of just kind of trying to get a snapshot of the existing noise environment. So there really is no standard for that. Usually when we're doing an ambient noise measurement, we're looking for the numbers to stabilize, right? So we're looking at the average, the maximums, the medians. We're looking for, how long it takes for those levels to more or less stabilize. And if it's a function of traffic, that usually happens in about 5 minutes, depending on the traffic. So a 10-minute sample is pretty common. Caltrans has some guidelines for that if you're trying to calibrate a noise model, but for a short-term measurement, 10 minutes is usually pretty typical. We did a lot of continuous measurements, which obviously measure continuously for a 24-hour period. But there really is no particular standard for governing duration of measurement on a short-term ambient measurement.
Well, and I just want to echo what the gentleman David said. I noticed your times were during lunchtime and they weren't during the time when school is really going in and out and backing up traffic all over, both in the morning and the evening. So that 10-minute is almost just misleading. So just observation.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
There was also a message in the chat from Carolyn about how much more traffic noise will there be when both Del Oro and the nearby tribal school are operating full time.
So the one thing with traffic is we have not at this point quantified what the existing traffic noise levels are. We've done ambient measurements, which are really more about documenting a snapshot in time. We're also looking for kind of a day-night distribution of traffic on busy roadways. When we get ready to map the townwide noise contours, existing noise contours, that's going to be based primarily on the average daily traffic as provided by the traffic engineer. So that question goes back probably more to the traffic engineer and when he did his counts and how he got to his daily predictions. Once we get those numbers, we put them into our sound model. There are some adjustments we make based on the data we collected in the field to more or less calibrate those predictions. But it has very little to do with when we measured the amount of traffic that was going by. It's going to come down to what the traffic engineer determines from his counts, if that makes sense. Other questions?
Yes, one more question from Carolyn, sorry. And what was your standard, or what was your rationale for picking the noise sites for the 24-hour that you did? Please.
So for the 24-hour sites, it was primarily looking at major roadways and the major rail lines, obviously. And the standards for those types of noise sources are in terms of the day-night sound level, LDN. So that's where determining the amount of nighttime noise versus the amount of daytime noise is particularly important. And so those continuous sites, if you'll notice, most of those were either by a rail line or a freeway or a major arterial. And the intent of that is to, again, kind of determine the difference between day and night and nighttime noise levels so that we can calculate the LDN noise level, the day-night average.
Roger Smith, you may unmute and ask your question.
I can't hear Roger Smith.
Can't be, and it shows him unmuted, so. I have a question. In the interim, Melissa Netzel has a question for you.
Yes, I've noticed, like for example, on the Franklin School on Taylor, around the time of 3 or 3:30, Taylor is totally packed with cars. I was wondering, should we make that run into two-lane road, or just leave it what it is? I like it. As a country, I don't it, but I don't know about the traffic.
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand the question that was being asked.
I said that Franklin School on Taylor Road, I've noticed that during pickup time, the lines of cars are very long, because of course everyone's coming back to children. Should we think about widening that road in the 2-lane, or should we do the country road? I like it as it's on the country road, but I don't know about the traffic.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I totally got all that, but there's something to do with the traffic queuing for the school. But I wasn't clear on what the question was related to the noise of possibly widening that. Was that the question? Yes. I mean, that's not really something that we would handle typically at a general plan level. That was something that would have to happen on a project level, specific analysis if you're talking about noise increases due to a specific project like that. At the general plan level, we're looking at changes in traffic noise due to projected growth in the sense of changes to your land use map. So a widening of a road to accommodate traffic for a school is not really something that we would probably focus on at the general plan level.
All right, I would say my question.
However, through the chair, I just want to point out that, let me just kind of broadly say for the committee, you may have site-specific observations or questions, or you may observe something, right, that's related to a particular intersection or a particular business or something like that. And, it's going to be our job to take those kind of real specific observations and then, broaden and generalize them to the general plan level. So for example, like if we're worried about traffic queuing during drop-off times or it's really more pickup times around schools, then maybe we look at policies to collaborate with school districts to make it easier to walk and bike to school so there aren't so many cars backed up. Or maybe we identify ways to use the public right-of-way temporarily for queuing or something like that to in a way that works, or whatever the response is, to back up 10,000 feet to the general plan level to say, okay, I've observed this thing. Well, maybe there is a policy response. So, Luke's right about that school, but we're going to have our general plan ears on as we go through these committee meetings to take site-specific observations and broaden them to the general plan level and policy.
Okay, thank you.
Good point.
I have a question. I know in Rockland, they eliminated a lot of the horn noise at a lot of their intersections. Is that possible to do at some of our intersections in Loomis? Because the train noise is quite noisy. Just wondering, if that's a possibility, so we can eliminate that noise in our lives, or not.
That is possible. I don't know the specifics of that process. I know that it takes a federal action to establish a quiet zone. And I know a number of jurisdictions have looked at that, including Roseville, Rockland, Lincoln, I believe, Elk Grove. It's a good point. It's definitely worth looking at. I just don't know the specific action. I'm pretty sure it would have to happen outside of the general plan, but I don't know if maybe there's some policies that could be adopted that, would encourage the city to look at the feasibility of that. But I do know there are certain requirements that have to be met at the grade crossings before conductors can have the option of not sounding their horns, because they are required under federal law to sound their horns. There are certain barriers and things that can be constructed to protect the intersection that would allow the conductor at their discretion to not sound their horns. They can always sound their horns if they feel there's an immediate public or a need for safety. And so we've saw that in Roseville a number of years ago. We actually worked with Roseville, and they had some wayside horns that are like focalized speakers that actually sound the sound of a horn, and it's very focused on the intersection. And that is an option that would allow the conductors to not have to sound their horns. But what we saw was they still sound their horns sometimes, right? So it's not a 100% fix, but if you get some conductors just enjoy it, I think, so they do it, right? So it's a little bit of a wild card, but I think it can give some relief if you go down that route.
Roger Smith, you had your hand up and did not ask a question. I saw you type in the chat, but do you still have an issue you need to get a response to? And if so, you will need to unmute device. Thank you. Oh,
Mark
okay.
Meyer, you have a question?
There you go.
Quick question. Thank you. First of all, thank you to staff and everyone for putting a lot of work into all this, because it doesn't come unappreciated. There's a lot to do, and everybody on the committee and the staff, I certainly appreciate what everybody's doing. My question is, aside from schools and things like the railroad crossings and things like that, more particularly probably to Luke and Matthew, is there anything that you've seen so far within your planning process or any kind of your preparation that would be a special area of concern, or something that might use kind of a large degree of resources, especially considering the fact that the state seems to be putting more requirements on people in response to kind of recent events regarding climate, COVID, things like that?
The question is, let me rephrase it and you'll tell me if I got it right. Have we seen anything so far as we have put together these settings sections, and as we have examined the current regulatory environment, state laws, compared to what Loomis has on the books right now? Is there anything that we've seen that is going to require a lot of resources to respond appropriately? Is that?
Yeah, exactly. Not necessarily user resources, but just in terms of time and scope of completed, because a lot of that seems to be going on right now.
Yeah, well, there is one thing that I wanted to find a way to bring up this evening, and it has to do with, I mentioned AB 379. The state now requires local governments in their general plans to address a changed climate and adaptation and resiliency. More extreme heat events, flooding, etc., the things that will happen as the climate changes. And there's pretty good regional information on that topic. SACOG has done, the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, our regional planning agency, has done some very helpful research and reporting on this topic. And then Placer County also did what's called a vulnerability assessment that looks at hazards related to climate change compared to where there are populations and facilities. And so that's also very good and helpful information, but it's not at, neither of those studies are at a kind of a resolution or disaggregated level to specifically apply to different parts of the town of Loomis. And we went into this hoping to be able to use existing state data, existing regional data, and the Placer County data on a changed climate, adaptation, resiliency, vulnerability, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel. However, more and more of the guidance that's coming out is in fact suggesting that more spatial resolution on adaptation resiliency strategies is appropriate. So in other words, we would be interested in where urban heat island effects are the worst, and then what the strategies are to address that in, specifically, but by location. And all this is subject to local agency discretion. State legislature opines on what has to be in a general plan, but legislature doesn't usually get into a ton of detail on exactly how every town, every city, every county has to implement that state guidance. And so we do have discretion there, but that is kind of an area where I just kind of wonder, would more spatial resolution, would more detail on the effects of changed climate be helpful? It would seem to be responsive to state law dictates, maybe not mandatory, but that is one thing that I think of in response to that question.
Thank you.
I see Roger Smith is unmuted. So Roger, you've got the floor. I thought maybe third time would be the charm.
Mary Beth, can you, let's suggest that Roger type in the chat. Maybe his microphone is inoperable.
Yeah. Okay, we'll wait and see if there's a message that comes forward. We'll have an attendee that has her hand raised. And Sarah M.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, I just wanted to thank this group for taking on these issues. Everybody who loves Loomis understands these are really important issues to be addressed by Loomis residents. I noted, I just wanted to note that I had tried to join this Zoom via the public health and safety meeting Zoom link that was provided on the agenda. And that ended in 986, and that didn't actually work. So I had to actually go to the public health and safety meeting noise setting agenda, which had the correct Zoom link. So I thank you for providing that. I think there is a little bit of challenge for access to the meeting. And I hope we afford a little bit of grace for people who may not have been able to attend because of that. A little bit of problem. I don't know if in the future there will be more streamlined, links to check on, or an easier way for people to navigate the website. But I did find it a little bit troublesome when I tried to join the meeting today. And I'll go ahead and unmute.
Thank you, Sarah. And you had typed that message in the chat, and I will take full credit for that login mishap. We set up 2 separate meetings, but then held one. So I think that's why some people probably are not in this meeting. They went to the other one and nobody was there, but didn't know to combine those. So future meetings, if we're combining Public Health and Safety Committee, along with the Noise Committee, we will provide just one Zoom link so everybody comes in at the same time. And thank you for bringing that to my attention.
And Mary Beth, I know we've been taking questions from committee members, but just for procedural, I need to open it up for a public comment. We just heard from Sarah. Do you see any more raised hands in the chat?
I do. Anders Hauge from Hauge Bruick and Associates, unmute and you're ready to go.
All right. It's really clarification for the committee. The comments came up about traffic. The circulation element has retained a service called Streetlight, which looks at traffic based on cell phone data, and it's proven to be quite accurate. So we will be able to look at traffic in July of 2020, and we'll be able to look at traffic in 2019, compare, and that information then will be used by Luke in the noise modeling and definitely will be used in the traffic and circulation. So we're going to have some pretty accurate traffic data that we can use in the general plan and for the noise element.
Thank you, Andy. I have no further hands raised.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'd like to express my gratitude and thanks to Mark Gerken and Luke Saxelby for an excellent presentation and for fielding all of our questions. I'd also like to thank Christy Consolini for being here. I didn't recognize you in the beginning, Christy. My apologies. And with that, we have our next meeting, which will be April 21st at 6 p.m. And with that, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Chairman, I
Yes.
have raised, Christy has her hand raised, if she can comment in there.
It looks like Roger was. It looks like Roger was able to leave a comment, a written comment.
Oh, thank you, Christy. So Roger's comment, and we did get word that he was having issues with his microphone. So he did type in the chat. He said there is a hodgepodge of noise descriptors in the town setting: LEQ, LDN, CNEL, etc. If that makes sense to Luke and Matt.
It does. I agree, Mary Beth, and I think perhaps what's needed there is to look at, make sure we're defining terminology or including a list of terms. I think that's something we could easily include.
Thank you. And thank you, Roger. And with that, I believe we are done.
Okay, so now, thank you to all participants, and now the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.